Welcome everyone. The mystery schools are no longer mysterious. Welcome to book study number 30 of Unfolding Consciousness, written down by Dr. Eddie Villamoria. We are continuing our Death is Transition series, and I'm loving this. Today, we are covering the Antahkarana, also spelled Antahkarana. You will hear me throw in Jacob's Ladder, which is from the Bible, having stepping up to heaven. This week, in the Antahkarana, this is the connection, okay? I usually do it in my body here, but it's the connection between the higher and the lower self. It's man's spiritual life support. Remember, Eddie will be here with us next month. So any questions, comments, insights, ideas, suggestions you have, please leave them here. It is important to remember that this is a 4-volume set actually. The fourth one is the reference one. Now remember, Eddie did not come up with these. It's over 1,000 pages. He has, though, researched, referenced, written, compiled, and completely explained them in heroic depth. So this is not just about selling this book. If you want it, it's a great reference manual, but this is about getting them out into the world of today, where it is so desperately needed, and not in the form of a religion or a society or an organization or, God forbid, a church, but it's simply so you can study and apply them in your life. They're also available online, not just this text. So please, if you are gaining anything from these Sunday study sessions, I humbly ask you, please, to like, subscribe, and share, because it changes the algorithm and helps to get them out there. So remember, it's not about me, it's not about Eddie. The teachings are the star here. These book studies are really all about you. Now we continue through in volume 2 of Unfolding Consciousness, exploring the living universe and the intelligent powers in nature and humans. Again, a 4-volume set. We are in volume 2, which has a subtitle of Peering Down the Microscope, Man's Internal Landscape. So we're looking inside the human being. Continuing through chapter 5, Death is Transition, Time at the Door of Eternity. We are on page 86. And our yellow post-it study notes for this week are: the Antahkarana provides spiritual life support. The Antahkarana enables the transfer of consciousness, accounting for Jekyll and Hyde and Jack the Ripper phenomena. The consequences when the Antahkarana is prematurely severed. Now we will also distinguish between intelligence, intellect, and cunning, and we will cover the telltale signs of the premature severance of the Antahkarana. And also, when the Antahkarana has served its purpose, what happens then? And don't forget, you get 20% off this 4-volume hardback set with the UC Book Study code that's all yours. It's exclusively for you, UC Book Study, and only from the Shepard Walwyn website. So let's begin. The Antahkarana, the connection between the personal and the divine, man's spiritual life support. As HPB explains, Antahkarana, she's using an S here, is the lower manas, the path of communication or communion between the personality and the higher manas, or the soul. Again, the Antahkarana is the path of communication or communion between the personality and the higher manas, or the human soul. Now, the Sanskrit word Antahkarana, also spelled Antahkarana, means internal instrument, hence a path or a bridge, derived from the compound antar, meaning interior, and between, and karana, meaning the sense organ, derived from the verbal root kri, meaning to act and to do, so therefore it's an action, okay? It's an interior action. So the essential meaning behind Antahkarana, in the technical sense used by HPB Blavatsky, is the intermediate instrument or a vehicle of consciousness, functioning as a narrow bridge between the higher and the lower manas. So I'm going to say that again. The essential meaning behind Antahkarana in the technical sense is the intermediate instrument or vehicle of consciousness, functioning as a narrow bridge between the lower and the higher manas or minds. In this sense, therefore, it is a vehicle of consciousness, as shown in the last table. So let's go to this table. Here we go. This is table volume 2, 5, chapter 3 on page 40. So I know some of you like these tables. Eddie really doesn't hold anything back. He doesn't. So let's take a look at this one. This is table 2. That's the Roman numeral 2, 5. The nature of man, how he functions, egoic centers, and vehicles of consciousness. So vehicles, the carrier, in other words. So taking a look here at the last column, You can see right here in the middle of the manas, the higher and lower minds. So you can see that. See the little white box? Okay, it says the Antahkarana, the bridge between the personal ego and the higher ego. And this is corresponding to the animal and spiritual natures. So I want to say here, animal, dear God, we are far more beast-like than any animal, but this just means the lower beast-like natures and desires. So it's almost insulting when I see that, to call us animal, because we are far worse than any animal could be. We humans are. But anyway, there you go. The Antahkarana, the bridge between the personal ego and the higher ego, corresponding to the animal and spiritual natures. So you see right next to it, again, the lower and higher mind. And thank you. That is table volume 2-5. For simplicity, the primary function of Antahkarana has been described here as the path or the bridge linking the lower and higher manas, the personal ego, the self, the personality, with the higher self or inner ego, the soul. In fact, as Godfrey de Purucker explains, the human septenary, now septenary means 7, the constitution. So real quick, if you are new here, man is a 7-fold being. So therefore we have several Antahkaranas, one for every connection between any two of the several monadic centers in man. For example, the astral, the physical, the mental, the etheric, all that. So as microcosm of the macrocosm, man is therefore a unity in diversity, a unified combination. And Antahkaranas are the link of vibrating consciousness substance, uniting these various centers. Interestingly, however, some Australian Aboriginal tribes speak of a very similar bridge between the lower self and the spirit. In popular terms, they call it the rainbow snake. The rainbow snake. You've also heard the rainbow bridge and kundalini and all that, so listen. Another helpful metaphor is an umbilical connection. So during a spacewalk, astronauts will have an umbilical cord from their spacesuit to the spaceships to supply oxygen and an environmental control system. An umbilical cord from mother to baby supplies the fetus with oxygenated, nutrient-rich blood, invoking the Hermetic axiom as above, so below. The Antahkarana thus serves as an umbilical connection between the higher ego as parent with its child, the personality. In these first two examples of astronaut and mother and child, it is a matter of physical life support. But with Antahkarana, it is a psycho-spiritual life support. But the principle is always one and the same. It is obvious that at any level, severing an umbilical connection prematurely would have dire consequences. Now, Eddie states that how this pertains to Antahkarana will soon become obvious. So listen. Now, the purpose and function of the Antahkarana serves as the medium. I know I'm sounding repetitive here, but listen, the medium of communication between the lower and the higher ego, conveying to the latter all those personal thoughts and impressions which by their nature can qualify to be absorbed by the eternal higher entity and thus be made immortal. Therefore, whatever personal thoughts and impressions are transferred are only those elements of the transitory, the earthly personality that survive death and time. It then stands to reason that only those thoughts and aspirations that are noble or altruistic and of a spiritual nature can be so absorbed by the higher ego into eternity. And besides providing comfort to bereaved family members and friends, the main purpose of the funeral ceremony and the prayers of practically all religions in whatever form is to assist the newly departed person in crossing this bridge from earth to heaven by severing former earthly ties and moving towards higher realms of consciousness. Now, this is especially significant if the person has suffered a violent or a sudden death like in war, and to anyone who has been denied the grace of a past life review during the natural dying process. Not everybody gets to have them because of circumstances. So how is this link between the lower and the higher mind formed? Now, it is not possible to identify it objectively as an existing entity. You can't. Nevertheless, It is entirely real for the conscious experiencer of it. So again, the Antahkarana is impossible to identify in the physical world. We can't scientifically show it, but for those who are aware of it and use it and understand it, it's very, very real. The Antahkarana is a projection. It's a projection of the lower mind, being the part which retains its purity by virtue of not becoming identified with and thus defiled by all the lower desires and emotions, because there's a lot of those in our personality. But as previously explained, the lower mind itself is an emanation of the higher mind. So there is always a possibility of a reunion with its parent source. Should I repeat that again? Yes, let's. So the Antahkarana is impossible to identify scientifically. We can't show it to you in the physical world, but to those who are aware of it, it is a very, very real thing. The Antahkarana is a projection of the lower mind, being the part which retains its purity by virtue of not becoming identified or married to or defiled by all the lower desires of this earthly life and our earthly personality. But the lower mind itself is an emanation of the higher mind, so there is always the possibility of a reunion with its parent source. Accountability for human traits. Human traits span the virtually limitless space from utter criminality to supernal genius. We now outline how Antahkarana features in these broad categories. For the average person, the Antahkarana disintegrates at death, and its remains survive for a while as the Kamarupa. Remember that? What is that? The desire body. That's right, the astral shell. Ultimately, however, the Antahkaranic bridge has to be destroyed, or rather transcended, left behind, during life. Listen, by the merging of the personal nature with the divine self. But a serious warning is given in occult literature that any premature attempt to destroy or move beyond your Antahkarana before the personal ego, the lower self, is under the complete control of the higher ego, the impersonal ego, the higher self, we risk to lose the connection with our higher selves entirely. That can be severed forever, unless indeed there's some kind of, quick action to have communication by great and final efforts. So listen, this is important. The reasons are as follows. HPB mentions the example of Robert Louis Stevenson, the Scottish novelist, poet, and musician, who witnessed a true vision in his novel, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, about the struggle between good and evil that Dr. Jekyll faced and how, in the end, his own good nature was overpowered by the evil within himself. A perfect allegorical account about the horrific catastrophe that can result. It can in the premature destruction of the Antahkarana. That's when the psycho-animal lower self detaches away from the divine parent source. This conventional tale of a man taken over by his dark side has become an entrenched metaphor of the shadow self. That should sound familiar. Presumably, however, in order to show her students that the Jekyll and Hyde phenomenon is not just the stuff of novels, HPB also cites an actual example of criminality that has become imprinted on the public mind for sadistic brutality. The serial killer Jack the Ripper of Victorian London. There is no shortage right now of modern instances of lone, brutal serial killers, especially of young women and innocent children. Eddie prefers right now not to mention that in here. We don't need to do that. Real-life societal examples during any epoch of human history are also, unfortunately, not hard to find. In modern times, for example, it is Eddie's persuasion that the monstrous crimes perpetrated against humanity by totalitarian dictators and their henchmen, again, not mentioning any names here, who commit crimes in full awareness of their actions, but without any subsequent trace of remorse or regret, may be due to the premature destruction of their Antahkarana. This is happening for all sorts of reasons, and it's too difficult to go into super details here. So therefore, it's freeing the animal self to run amok and revolt without the conscious giving connection to the higher self. Now, this is what is known in occultism as soulless beings on earth. Now, side note here from me, this sounds a lot like psychopathy. Those who are devoid of empathy, which I still find so baffling. I don't get that. So let HPB explain. We find two kinds of soulless beings on earth, that is, soulless beings on earth, who have lost their higher ego in the present incarnation, and those who are born soulless, having been severed from their spiritual soul in the preceding birth. The former are candidates for Avicii, or hell, what we talked about last week. And the latter are Mr. Hydes, whether in or out of their human bodies, whether incarnated in the flesh or hanging about as invisible but potent ghouls. In such men, cunning develops to an enormous degree, and no one, except those who are familiar with the doctrine, would suspect them of being soulless, for neither religion nor science has the least suspicion that such facts actually exist in nature. I'm going to say that again. That's brilliant. Listen. We find two kinds of soulless beings on earth. Those who have lost their higher ego in the present incarnation, and those who are born soulless, having been severed from their spiritual soul in the preceding birth. The former are candidates for Avicii, or hell. We talked about that last week. Check out that episode. It's a great episode. The latter are Mr. Hydes, whether in or out of their human bodies, whether incarnated or hanging about as invisible but strong and dangerous ghouls. In such men, cunning develops to an enormous degree, and no one except those who are familiar with the doctrine would suspect them of being soulless, because neither religion nor science has any idea that such facts actually exist in nature. So that's why we're doing these videos. It's why these books are out there, these ancient teachings. It is important to appreciate that extreme criminality has nothing whatsoever to do with the intellectual stature of the offender. It doesn't have anything to do with intellect. Blavatsky's quote supplies more than a mere hint at why some of the worst criminals in history have been men of great persuasion and high intellect in the service of animal cunning. Animal cunning, as Blavatsky proclaims, is not so easily detected, since such people can be possessed with lots of charm and influence. It is Eddie's point here, and I'm going to say this slowly so you can catch this. Listen. That the extent to which a person displays cunning and manipulative characteristics, this is never to be confused with intelligence or disciplined authority, is a measure of the extent to which such a person is an agent or an instrument for the workings of dark forces. Such persons can be found in all walks of life, including spiritual society. This extremely important point is taken up in the final summation in Chapter 11 and the epilogue in Volume 3 of Unfolding Consciousness. So it is that even nowadays, neither religion nor science has the least idea that such facts actually exist in nature. When will we see? It is occult science, being the best scientific source that there is right now, that supplies the missing pieces of the psychological jigsaw puzzle. But to continue this subject, as complex as it is highly dangerous if taken in impartially or incompletely. That wouldn't be helpful. So serious readers can consult the source references that are cited throughout the chapter. So there are references throughout Unfolding Consciousness. Eddie explains things and tells you where you can find the original information. So note that the above is in no way saying or suggesting that all criminals or ordinary criminals, if we can say that, have lost their Antahkaranic connection. But only those who, and it bears repeating, listen, are fully aware of their criminal actions, and they revel in their brutality and their cruelty, and they display no empathy and no remorse, thus indicating the complete severance of the umbilical connection, between the child personality and its divine parent, or the source. As the chronicles of the law courts adequately testify, the majority of offenders experience much shame and much repentance for their behavior. For such and many other reasons, it is suggested that the Christ taught, "I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents," thus reestablishing and strengthening the Antahkarana connection with the divine source, heaven, than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. That's what he was talking about. Related to the above, it will be apparent that strengthening the Antahkarana is of paramount importance to the awakening of genius, because each step across the bridge is won by personal effort in disciplining and purifying the lower nature, which at the same time increases the power and the influence of the higher nature. Are you listening? The wellspring of genius, which is further explored in Chapter 9 of Volume 3. If you'd like to know more about that, we'll probably cover that on these studies. Finally, and in rare circumstances, when the personal self is eternally linked with and merged into the divine mind, the Antahkarana has fulfilled its role and is no longer needed. After all, why would you maintain a bridge after you've crossed it? So if it's your bridge and you've crossed it, why do you need to keep it? So from A to B, you've already gone there. Why maintain that umbilical cord between the mother and the child when the latter is born and breathing normally? It seems evident that this may be the case in Mahatmas such as the Buddha, the Christ, and Ramana Maharishi, just to name a few. The conventional nature versus nurture, genes or environment. This is an argument that has value regarding the relative contribution of both influences towards human behavior, like personality, cognitive traits, temperament, and psychopathology. That's in regards to common humanity. But taken in isolation, such debates and arguments are futile in exceptional cases of criminality on the one hand, or genius on the other hand. Talking here of genetic predisposition and deviant neural pathways in the brain and or environmental influences and early childhood experiences explains absolutely nothing whatsoever. It is therefore high time that criminologists and psychologists and psychiatrists and neurophysiologists and ministers as a body come together to the stark realization that occult science alone can explain such extremes of deviant behavior or genius that these mainstream disciplines, by their own admission, singularly fail to comprehend. Now there's more on this. If you'd like me to read more, Eddie has some in an appendix on the Antahkarana. If you'd like me to do that in an episode, I certainly will. Just let me know your desires and I shall do as you wish. Let me know. And I love these studies so much. It's so true. If science, modern day science, would just take a look at the teachings that have been here since the beginning of time, and we would understand that there's more to our story. We only look at this one life. We only look at what we think we know. Oh my God. Anyway, there you go. Okay, so we will be doing more of these. This is Unfolding Consciousness, Exploring the Living Universe and the Intelligent Powers in Nature and Humans, written down, compiled, and explained lovingly by Dr. Eddie Villamoria. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them here, and I try to answer each and every one. I think I do. It's a pretty intimate crowd, but I appreciate you. If you're getting anything out of these, share these teachings. Share them. Please, please, please. Get them out into the world, because once you come across them, and you apply them, they do change your life. And it isn't just this text. They're out there online. Eddie has references to all of the sources that he put together in this. This is a 1,000-page compilation. But again, it's not about Eddie. It's not about me. These teachings are about you. They're all about you. You're the reason I suit up and show up every Sunday. So please like, subscribe, and share. Your comments are so welcome, just to know I'm not sitting here talking to myself. And I love you, and I will see you next Sunday. Mwah. Thank you.